Welcome. It's a lovely sunny day. It's nice to see you all here. And that's what I was going to talk about. I'm working my way through the family pledge. And a few weeks ago, hi everyone online. I see Raymond just lining the camera up. Welcome too. Be even more welcome if you were here in person. Anyway, so Raymond said, reminded me I haven't given the talk about family pledge number 8, so I was looking at it and thought, okay, well, this works with a Heavenly Parents Holy Community, and see why in a moment. So to remind you here, what we just read out, our family owner Chungagok pledges having entered the here Chungagok to achieve the ideal of human beings united in love. So united in love through absolute faith, absolute love, and absolute obedience. But also goes on to say, and to perfect the realm of liberation and complete freedom. And so all within the same sentence. And sometimes people struggle a lot with this O word, absolute obedience. What does it mean? How are you going to reconcile absolute obedience with the realm of liberation and complete freedom? How do you reconcile complete freedom and absolute obedience? Because usually when people think absolute obedience, so it means I'm not free. But actually, the two are there in the same sentence. So how does that work? So let's explore this. What is a family pledge? So as I mentioned to you before, Father said the family pledge is entirely made up of the essence of the providence of restoration. Okay? So the providence of restoration started with whom? Adam. Yeah, and Adam and Eve didn't quite get it right, so it passed on down to Cain and Abel, didn't manage to get it right, passed down to Noah and his family, didn't manage to get it right. But it then went on to Abraham. And Abraham's called the father of faith. And so it says that all Jews, Christians, and Muslims all say Abraham is the father of faith, and then they usually just move on. Except Jews say Abraham and Sarah. Abraham's the father of faith, Sarah is the mother of faith. So that's interesting. Anyway, so people think, okay, what does it mean Abraham's the father of faith? So many years ago, when I was teaching Islam at school, I came across this, thinking about, well, who's in the highest heaven? And this is what it says from the Quran. It says, He it is who created for you all that is in the earth. And he directed himself to the heaven. So he made them complete, 7 heavens, and he knows all things. So according to the Quran, then, there's 7 heavens. There's 7 levels within the spiritual world, 7 heavens. And then, okay, so that's what it says in the Quran. But then people started commentating on this. And one particular person, this is one of the earliest of the Muslim commentators, he talks about when Muhammad traveled from Mecca to he traveled from Medina he traveled from Mecca to Jerusalem. This is when going through the most intense persecution. He wanted this sort of magical horse called Burak, who took him over to the furthest temple. And then that's where the Dome of the Rock is today. So they went to that. Anyway, there's a Dome of the Rock shrine there now, but the rock itself, by tradition, is where God told Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. Anyway, so from that point there, he then entered into the spiritual world, and he traveled through the 7 heavens to meet God and to find out from God, how Islam should be. Anyway, so it says here, Muhammad ascended to the 7 stages of heaven with the angel Gabriel. In each stage, he met and spoke to different prophets. At the first stage, he met Adam. In the second stage, he met John the Baptist and Jesus. In the third stage, he met Joseph. In the 4th stage, he met Idris. Don't know who that is. In the 5th stage, he met Aaron. In the 6th stage, he met Moses. And lastly, in the 7th stage, he met Abraham. Now, I don't want to talk about, who happens to be in which level, but what always struck me was the fact that the person who is in the seventh heaven, the highest place in the spiritual world, according to Muhammad's own personal experience of traveling in the spiritual world, was Abraham. I thought, well, that's interesting. And then I just thought no more about it until quite recently. And then I was thinking about this because I've been studying a lot about the Bible and about particularly teaching a lot about Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob and the stories in Genesis. And then I was thinking about this, and also partly connects to my own personal journey. Of course, when we look at True Father and read his autobiography, we find that, of course, as we know, Father, when he was 16, he was called by Jesus. He was praying on the mountain on Easter Sunday to try to understand why were the Korean people going through such intense suffering under the Japanese occupation, and he had this encounter with Jesus. And Jesus called him and asked him to continue with his uncompleted mission, which was to establish the kingdom of heaven on the earth. And, Father was not too keen on this, but eventually he agreed to do that. And then he thought, okay, how do I build the kingdom of heaven? Has anybody ever tried to do it before? What should I go and read about? And so he didn't go and look at the books of Confucius or Plato or Aristotle. Actually, it was Jesus who called him, and so that's why he turned to the Bible. And he poured himself, as we know, in accounts of Father's Bible, it's been read over and over and over and over again. He read it, he studied intensely, studied the Bible, because that was where God's providence is recorded. The whole of the Bible is not a religious scripture. As I often say to people, it's political philosophy. It's a project there, how to establish the kingdom of heaven on earth. What is the kingdom of heaven? A kingdom of peace and justice. And this is long project over thousands of years to try to create this kind of society. So that's what he wanted to do, establish the kingdom of heaven. So he turned to the Bible, which is a religious text of political philosophy, which is the attempt to do that. So he's a student of the Bible and called by Jesus. Then I thought about Jesus. I'm a Christian. I grew up loving Jesus. But at the end of the day, I realized quite recently, Jesus wasn't a Christian. Jesus was a Jew. And for Jesus, what was the authoritative scripture? It was the Torah. Jesus was a student of the Bible, what we call the Old Testament, the Torah. And what Jesus was doing, when you actually study what he was saying, what he was doing is he was applying the Mosaic law to his time. So people often say, oh, Jesus said you should love your neighbors as you love yourself. That was in Deuteronomy. Love God with all your heart, soul, and strength. It's in Leviticus, or the other way around. Yeah, most of what Jesus taught is to be found in the teachings of Moses. And he was taking those teachings and trying to apply them to his own time to solve the problems in his own time. So I went, okay, what about Moses? Well, when God approached Moses on Mount Sinai, God's calling card was, I'm the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So basically, Moses was also a follower of Abraham and expanding that. And then you go on to Abraham. Well, Abraham was the son of an idol maker. So who did Abraham learn from? Who was Abraham's teacher? Father was a disciple of Jesus. Jesus is a disciple of Moses. Moses is a disciple of Abraham. So who's Abraham a disciple of? So in that sense, you could say Abraham was the original. I don't know what, the original thinker or philosopher or prophet. I can't think of a word that would describe who he was. So that's why Abraham then is a father of faith. You might wonder, what was Abraham's faith? Well, basically, it was monotheism. His father was an idol maker. The world in which he lived was a place of polytheism, where people worshipped many gods and believed that there were many gods that existed. Whereas Abraham, he was a very deep thinker. And again, this is from the Quran. When Abraham was a child, when the night grew dark upon him, he saw a star and said, "This is my Lord." In other words, he's going to worship a star. But when it set, he said, I do not love things that set. Then when he saw the moon rising, he said, this one is my Lord, and started worshipping the moon. But when it disappeared, he said, if my Lord does not guide me, I will certainly be one of the misguided people. Then when he saw the sun shining, he said, this must be my Lord, it is the greatest. But again, when it set, he declared, O my people, I totally reject whatever you associate with Allah in worship. I have turned my face towards the one who had originated the heavens and the earth, being upright, and I am not one of the polytheists. So here's this account how Abraham logically worked out that all the world in which we live is changing. But there must be some unchanging reality behind this changing world. There must be some first cause which initiated this universe and this world in which we live. And there's an account also of his childhood, how he approached his parents. Where did you come from? They said his grandparents, and he tried to trace his lineage. And he realized at the end of the day, there must be a first cause. So he came to that conclusion. So his faith then was based upon reason. It wasn't superstition. He rationally worked out there must be a first cause. There must be an unchanging reality, the creator of the heavens and the earth, and he determined that is who I'm going to worship. But also he rejected the idols. So this is again an account in the Talmud this time. And he was, as I said, his father was an idol maker. And so idols are statues. And I should have had some pictures here if I realized the young people were going to be in the... Do you know what an idol is? It's like a statue, and people bow down and they worship these statues. Or it might be a picture, and they bow down and worship the pictures. And they think, oh, these idols, they're gods. Anyway, so Terah, who is Abraham's dad, he used to carve these idols, these statues in his workshop. And he used to sell them. That was his job. Anyway, one day, he said to Abraham, go and sell the idols in the marketplace. And when somebody came up, most of the people who came to buy idols are 50 or 60 years old. And when they came to Abraham, who was just a teenager, and said to Abraham, can we buy one of your idols? And Abraham would say, what for? Well, I want to bow down and worship this God, this idol. And Abraham would say, why would you want to do that? You're 50 or 60 years old, and my dad made this last month in his workshop. You're older than they are, they should be bowing down and worshipping you. And the people went away not buying anything. Anyway, so when Abraham went home after that, his dad was not pleased because he hadn't sold a single idol. Anyway, the story goes on that he gave some food to the idols, and the idols didn't eat the food. And so Abraham came to the conclusion that only two fundamentals, God and human beings. Yeah, only two fundamentals in this universe, God and human beings. And then that was his faith. And other people at that time, they used to worship Nimrod. So Nimrod was a local dictator. So nowadays in some countries, people worship their king or they worship their dictator. So North Korea, for example, they all worship, they worship Kim Il-sung in the spiritual world, and they worship, I don't know what's happening there. And they worship these human beings. And so Nimrod was a local dictator in Ur, where Abraham was living at that time. And Terah said to Abraham, come along and tell Nimrod about what you think about God and idols. And so Abraham went in front of Nimrod, who was a dictator. And Nimrod said, you have to bow down and worship me. I am your God. And you find Mussolini and various dictators around the world in the past and today probably as well. They expect people to worship them. They're like the God. Anyway, so Abraham refused to do that. He said, I only worship the invisible God that created the heavens and the earth. And Nimrod said, if you don't bow down and worship me, I'll have you put to death. And Abraham said, I'm not afraid of you. God is more real to me than you are. God is more real to me than this palace in which you're living. If you kill me, I'll just be with God in the spiritual world. So that was his faith. And he absolutely So that was his faith, an absolute faith. And in that sense, you could say he changed his identity from being a child of an idol maker, from a family that worshipped idols, to someone who worshipped God, who found his identity not in his nationality, not in his race, not in where he came from, his city, but who found the core of his identity in his relationship with God, in the sense that I am the son of God, I'm a child of God. That is who I am, and I refuse to deny my identity. So in that sense, it's like a change of lineage. The father said he went through this life and death situation. At the risk of his life, he refused to deny who he was. So that was his faith, absolute faith in the principle, what he knew to be true, because his faith is based upon reason, and absolutely faithful to God, absolutely loyal to God, even at the risk of his life. He wouldn't deny his faith or deny God. And there are not many people around like that today. But during the communist period in the Soviet Union, you did find people like this, people who preferred to go to prison or even to lose their life than to deny their faith in God. And you can find the same in every religion, people who are willing to be martyred. That's that faith. They refuse to, complete loyalty. So that's what absolute faith is about then. Then Abraham loved his enemies. So one day, God came to Abraham and he was having a discussion with him, and God said, the cries of the victims in Sodom and Gomorrah are deafening. The sin of those cities is immense. I'm going to go down and see for myself if what they're doing is as bad as it sounds. Then I'll know. So he heard that all kinds of, basically it's a failed state and all kinds of crimes are going on. And Abraham confronted God. And Abraham said to God, are you serious? Are you planning to get rid of the good people right along with the bad? What if there are 50 decent people left in the city? Would you lump the good with the bad and get rid of the lot? Wouldn't you spare the city for the sake of those 50 innocents? I can't believe you'll do that. Kill off the good and the bad alike, as if there were no difference between them. Doesn't the judge of the earth judge with justice? Extraordinary statement. And most religions say that's blasphemy. How can you challenge God and say to God, you're the judge of the world, you need to be just? So if you're at school and are there sometimes children in school who misbehave in class? Yes? And what does the teacher do? Does the teacher punish the whole class or just that child? Yeah? If the teacher punishes the whole class, do people feel that's fair or unfair? What would you say? Unfair. Yeah? Only the person who misbehaves is the one who should be reprimanded or given a detention or whatever it is. To keep the whole class in is unfair. Why would you punish the innocent along with the guilty? That's not fair, that's not just. So what Abraham is doing is holding God up to this. Now you might think that Abraham would be quite pleased, the idea that God would come and destroy Sodom and Gomorrah, because they were really nasty people. And you might think, well, is there no justice in this world? Why aren't these nasty people getting punished? But Abraham actually had this incredibly clear conscience and felt it's not fair that the innocent should be punished along with the guilty. So God said, okay, if I find 50 decent people in the city of Sodom, I'll spare the place just for them. And Abraham came back. Do I, a mere mortal, made from a handful of dirt, dare open my mouth against my master? What if the 50 should fall short by 5? Would you destroy the city because of those missing 5? And God said, okay, I won't destroy it if there are 45. And Abraham spoke up again. What if you only find 40? Okay, neither will I destroy it for 40. And Abraham said again, Master, don't get irritated with me. You know what I mean? You can imagine how... But what if there are only 30 are found? Okay, no, I won't do it if I find 30. And he pushed on. I know I'm trying your patience, Master. But how about for 20? I won't destroy it for 20. And Abraham wouldn't quit. Don't get angry with me, Master. This is the last time. What if you only come up with 10? For the sake of only 10, I won't destroy the city. And when God finished talking with Abraham, he left. And Abraham went home. So can you imagine having that kind of conversation with a king? Or with a dictator? Or with the God that created the heavens and the earth? So people often think, oh, absolute obedience. If God tells me to do something, I have to do it. But Abraham was willing to stand up and challenge God and say to God, will not the judge of all the world judge with justice? You don't find that sentence in any other piece of religious literature. This idea that human beings should stand up in front of God and challenge God if they think God got it wrong. Yeah, interesting, isn't it? That was the kind of person that God chose, Abraham. And you can find over and over again that God chooses people, not people who are sycophants, not people who just do as they're told. He chooses people who are willing to stand up and confront him and challenge him and have this kind of intense conversation. And you find the same in Moses, even more intense conversations between Moses and God than you find here. And it's remarkable when you read these things, you know, how people talk to God and challenge God. And you might think, well, maybe that's the kind of people that God is looking for. God is looking for people who are willing to make a stand up. So Abraham was to become the role model and the initiator of a new faith, one that would not defend the human status quo, but challenge it. So he had to have the courage to challenge God if his descendants were to challenge human rulers, as Moses and the prophets did. So God is looking for people who are willing to stand up and challenge the status quo. Yeah. The word Hebrew means someone who's on one person on one side is Abraham and the rest of the world on the other. Yeah. He was on one side and the rest of the world was on the other. Because he was standing up, he was challenging the status quo of polytheism and all the things that went along with that, like child sacrifice and all the kind of sexual immorality and all kinds of stuff that he was standing up and challenging and refusing to conform himself to the ways of the world. But he's in the world, but not of the world. And he was standing there doing that. But to do that, you also had to be somebody who has so much sense of self to be even willing to challenge God. Yeah? How many people challenge true parents? Interesting, isn't it? Yeah? Do you think they want to be challenged? Do you think they want to be... Of course, it's the heart with which you do it. And so that's the thing. You find the prophets, they're always challenging God, but it's not that they never stop believing in God. Yeah, they never reject God, they never become atheists, never think that's not right, I'm not going to believe in God anymore. They just continued this eternal conversation with God. They never abandoned God. So that was Abraham then. He absolutely loved who? He absolutely loved his enemies. The people of Sodom and Gomorrah, he was living next to them. They were the people who used to come round and throw rocks at his tent and make fun of him and steal his sheep. And these are his enemies. But from his point of view, he cared about them. These are the people who he wanted to witness to. Yeah? So he loved his enemies. Yeah? It's not about loving God, this absolute love for enemies. Yeah? And then what about absolute obedience? Well, this is interesting. After these things, God tested Abraham and said to him, Abraham. And he said, here am I. He said, take your son, your only son Isaac, whom you love, and offer him as a burnt offering. So Abraham rose early in the morning. So you might wonder, well, what's going on here? What is Abraham obeying? What's going on here? Is Abraham willing to challenge God and disobey God if he thinks God's got it wrong? Yeah? He argued with God about the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. So why didn't Abraham argue with God about sacrificing Isaac? Yeah? If Abraham thought God got it wrong, he's willing to stand up and argue with God. Yeah? So why wasn't he willing to stand up and argue with God about this instruction to sacrifice Isaac? So what's going on? So the question here is, I think I might have told you before, the question here is, to whom does Isaac belong? Yeah? To whom does Isaac belong? To whom do people belong? Yeah? So in the ancient world, children belonged to their parents. Children were the property of their parents. So that meant parents could sell their children. If they're running out of money, parents could sell their children into slavery. Why? Because the children were the property of the parents. So parents could sell children into slavery. If the children were disobedient, and the parents had the right to put their children to death. Why? Because they were their property. Yeah, I can smash up my table or my television at home if I want to. It's not a crime. Why? Because it's mine. It's my television. It's my table. I can burn it, smash it up, do whatever I like with it. It's not a criminal offense because it's my property. In the ancient world, children were the property of their parents. And so parents could do whatever they wanted with their children. Not only were children the property of the parents, but a woman was a wife was a property of the husband. And according to ancient law, many countries, men could sell their wives into slavery and worse. It's just the way it was. That was a legal situation. Why has Harrow Council popped up? Okay. And then we can see this is all from the fall. So when she first gave birth, Eve says, with the help of the Lord, I've acquired a man. And so Eve thought, I've acquired a man. So she called him Cain. So from Eve's point of view, Cain was her son was her property. She owned, these are my children, I own them. She's a very, very possessive kind of mother. That's not good. Sometimes who owns people? Maybe it's a state. So in many societies today, you're a citizen of the state. That means you're the property of the state. That means the state has the right and the authority to do what it wants with you and send you off to war. Not so much in this country because we're subjects of the king. But the continental tradition, you're citizens of the state. You're the property of the state. And the state will give you an identity number. And especially if you go to a place like Russia, that's entirely the mentality. The state has the right to sacrifice people for its own purposes and its own ends, because citizens are the property of the state. And their first loyalty should be to the state. The state gives them their identity, the state makes the laws, etc., etc. Or do people belong to other people? That's slavery. In the state of slavery, you can own another human being, you can buy and sell people. Or do people belong to God, the Creator? So this is a challenge that Abraham was facing. When God said to Abraham, sacrifice your son as a burnt offering, the son that you love, Abraham had a choice. Is he going to do what God asked or not? So he could say to God, no, I'm not going to do that. And God would say, why not? And Abraham could say, because he's my son, he's my property. I own him. If I want to sacrifice him to you as a burnt offering, I can do that because he's mine. But you do not have the right to ask me to sacrifice my son because he's not yours, he's mine. You can only sacrifice and destroy something that belongs to you. So Abraham is having to decide here, to whom does Isaac belong? And he comes to the conclusion, he realizes actually Isaac is God's property. Isaac is God's son. Just as I am God's son, Isaac is God's son. And therefore, God has the authority to decide what's going to happen to Isaac. He's not my son, he's God's son. And because he's God's son, therefore God has the authority to ask me to sacrifice him for whatever reason I cannot imagine. I don't understand why, but God has that authority. And so what's going on here? And so Abraham realized that, he knew that. And that was his conscience. His conscience told him, Isaac belongs to God. Therefore, God has the authority to ask me to sacrifice him because he's God. So his conscience told him, actually, this is what I have to do. He was not obeying God, he was obeying his conscience. He was quite happy to disobey God if he thought God got it wrong, but he wasn't willing to go against his conscience. Yeah, that's what God told Abraham, be blameless. And then it's the same happened with Isaac. When Isaac realized, he was a teenager, he realized what was going to happen. He was the one that was going to be sacrificed. It was very clear to him. He also had a choice to make. Okay, to whom do I belong? Do I belong to myself? I've got all kinds of plans of what I want to do with my life. This is my life. Or do I belong to God? In which case God can decide how to dispose of me, if that's what he chooses. And Isaac also had to decide, yes, I belong to God. And because I'm God's property, in that sense I belong to God, if God wants to sacrifice me for whatever reason I cannot possibly imagine, then God has the right and the authority to do that. And that's what his conscience told him. And so that's what's going on here. Abraham was absolutely following his conscience. Not even absolutely obeying God, he was absolutely obeying his conscience. And so these three absolutes then, there's absolute faith in God and the principle. And C.S. Lewis, who wrote the stories of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe, and the greatest Christian apologist of the 20th century, he said, faith is the art of holding on to things your reason has once accepted, in spite of your changing moods. So, when you hear the principle, it all makes complete logical sense. Oh, yeah, that's true. But then sometimes we go through incredible difficulty, and God exists, God is a reality, this, and this, and this. But sometimes we go through incredible difficulties and suffering. And sometimes people say, I don't believe in God anymore, because if God really existed, then this wouldn't happen. Yeah? So that's what absolute faith is. It's holding on to things your reason has once accepted, which is Abraham's faith based upon reason, even when you're going through difficult times. And you may have changing moods. And the absolute love for enemies is the love for the other. Yeah? Love your enemies and pray for those that persecute you, which is what Jesus taught. Jesus didn't say love your children, he said love your enemies. Yeah? Which sometimes might be your children, you never know, or your wife. But that's the point. It's not love the people you like. That's easy. Yeah, it's love the people you don't like. Yeah, that's the difficult thing. Love the people that persecute you. Love the people that mistreat you. At the end of the day, if you find someone who's in difficulty, you may say, oh, I don't like that person. He said some really nasty things to me recently. Therefore, I'm just going to walk by on the other side. Yeah? It's actually, this person may have said some really nasty things about me, but this person needs my help. So I'm going to go and help them anyway. Even though I don't like them, even though I dislike them intensely, I'm going to take care of them. That's love. Yeah, it's not like, it's love. And then absolute obedience to conscience. As Father said, to what does the revolution of conscience refer? This is an inner revolution in which we must practice absolute obedience to the voice of our conscience. Yeah, absolute obedience to the voice of our conscience. So that's what Father emphasized. So when we talk about, in the family pledge, absolute obedience, if absolute obedience to our conscience means in that sense we're completely free. If you absolutely follow your conscience, you can do whatever you like. You're free to just follow and do anything you want as long as you're following your conscience. So as long as you're absolutely following your conscience, you're absolutely free. You're living in a realm of complete liberation and complete freedom, which is what it's all about. Creating the kingdom of heaven as a world of complete freedom. But it only works if people absolutely obey their conscience, listen to their conscience, and live within that space of the conscience, and also take care of each other, especially the people they don't like, and also continue to have faith. Yeah, faith. Being faithful means being loyal to God and to the truth, and all those things. Okay. Anyway, don't know what you think about that, but that's the way I've been trying to wrestle with all these things myself over the years, trying to make sense of these things. And so, the more and more I look at the life of Abraham and the teachings of Abraham, the more I realize he is the original thinker, the original prophet, the original person who came to this encounter with the divine, and all the other people since then are all derivative thinkers. So in that sense, I've been working my way back and realizing at the end of the day, I'm a disciple of Abraham. And that's why belonging to Heavenly Parents, holy community, and there is the original person who started it all off. Absolute faith, absolute love, and absolute obedience was Abraham. And not only Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, but within the tradition there is this idea that Abraham had lots of other children after Sarah died, and then before he died, he sent them to the east, and those are the founders of the religions in India and in the Far East as well. Okay, so thank you all very much, and wish you all a good day. Thank you.